The forest was dark, and the wind was cold. Leaves rustled high above as strange shapes moved in the trees. A girl was running, her breath heavy, her steps fast. Her clothes were torn, her legs shaking, but she didn't stop. Something was chasing her, something she could not see, but she could feel it. Like cold fingers touching the back of her neck, her foot hit a root, and she fell hard. Pain shot through her side, but she got back up. She knew she had to keep going. She didn't even know where she was anymore. The forest was huge, and she was lost. But anything was better than being caught again. Suddenly, she stepped on something thin. It made a sharp snap sound, and the ground under her feet shifted. Before she could move, thick metal wires shot up around her. One wrapped around her ankle, and another grabbed her waist. She screamed. As the trap pulled her up into the air, her body swung upside down between two trees. She struggled, kicking and twisting, but the wires only tightened. They cut into her skin, and blood dripped down her arm. She screamed again, this time louder, hoping someone, anyone, might hear. But the forest stayed quiet, only the sound of birds far away. Her heart pounded in her chest, her arms went numb. She screamed one more time, but her voice cracked and faded. Far away, in a small wooden shelter made of scrap and metal sheets, a human man looked up. He had heard something faint, distant, but not a normal forest sound. He stood still for a moment, then heard it again, a scream, weak but sharp, cutting through the trees. He grabbed his coat, strapped on his knife, and stepped outside. There were many dangerous animals in the forest, but something told him this wasn't just an animal. He moved quickly but carefully, stepping over roots and ducking under branches. The sound came again, shorter this time, as if someone was losing strength. He followed it, heart beating faster. The forest grew thicker, darker, as he walked deeper. Inside, he passed strange claw marks on the trees and bones on the ground. Still, he didn't stop. Finally, he saw something hanging between the trees. He stepped closer and gasped. It was a girl, not human, but clearly alive. She had strange violet skin, long white hair, and sharp glowing eyes that stared at him in fear. Her body was limp, but she still breathed. He raised both hands slowly, showing her he meant no harm. She growled weakly and tried to reach for something at her side, but the trap had her too tight. The human moved closer and pulled out a small blade. "I'm here to help," he said calmly. She didn't understand the words, but the tone made her stop struggling. He cut one wire, then another, and gently caught her as she fell. She was light and cold, and her skin had bruises and cuts. She passed out in his arms, her body too tired to fight anymore. He looked around. There were no sounds of chasing footsteps. Still, he knew they had to leave fast. Carrying her in his arms, he made his way back. His legs were strong, but his mind was racing. Who was she? Why was she in a trap like that? That kind of snare wasn't made for animals. It was meant for someone intelligent. Someone wanted her caught, or worse, dead. Back at his shelter, he laid her gently on a pile of old blankets. He lit a small fire, boiled water, and cleaned her wounds. She didn't wake up, but her breathing was steady. He looked at her face and saw pain, fear, and something else. She had been running for her life, and he had found her just in time. Outside, deep in the trees, yellow eyes watched from the shadows. They blinked once, then vanished into the darkness. The forest held many secrets, and this was only the beginning. But now, a bond had been made, one that would change everything. The human didn't know her name, and she didn't know his. But fate had brought them together on that cold, wild night, and something deep in the forest wanted to tear them apart. The fire cracked softly inside the small shelter, warming the cold air around them. The human sat close, watching the strange girl as she slept. Her skin had a bluish tone, almost like soft moonlight. Her white hair was messy and full of leaves, and her face looked tired even in sleep. She hadn't moved since he brought her back. She was breathing, but slowly, as if every breath took effort. He checked her wounds again, wiping the blood away. with clean cloth and hot water. Some cuts were deep, but none were deadly. Still, she had lost a lot of blood, and she looked half-starved. He placed a bowl of soup near her and waited. She didn't wake, but her hand twitched, then curled weakly into a fist. The human leaned back, staring at the metal roof above him, thinking hard. This wasn't the first time he had heard strange things in the forest, but it was the first time someone screamed for help. Most people didn't enter the wild zone unless they had a death wish. It was full of old war traps, beasts with broken coating, and worse. But now she was here, lying on his floor like some lost survivor, and something about her made him stay alert. Hours passed before she finally opened her eyes. She sat up fast, panic in her eyes, and looked around with wild fear. The human raised his hands again, moving slowly. He didn't speak, just pointed at the soup, then at her stomach. She froze for a moment, then looked down at her wrapped wounds. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to say something, but couldn't. He pushed the bowl closer, then stepped back to give her space. Her eyes stayed on him for a long time, unsure if he was friend or trap. Finally, with shaky hands, she took the bowl and sniffed it. She sipped it carefully, eyes never leaving his face. After the second sip, her shoulders dropped just a little. She was still afraid, but the warmth of the soup helped her body relax. Outside, strange sounds came from the trees, rustling, clicking, whispering. The human stood up slowly and walked to the metal door. Peeking out, red eyes glowed far in the distance, then disappeared. He closed the door and locked it with a quiet sigh. They weren't safe yet, not really. He had a feeling that whatever put that trap out there wasn't done yet. She watched him from behind the soup bowl, slowly putting the pieces together. He had saved her, fed her, and didn't try to hurt her. She didn't understand his words, but his actions were clear. Still, she didn't speak, not even a single word. Not because of language, but because something had broken inside her long ago. Her voice had been taken, her trust buried deep. He offered her a blanket, and she hesitated, then took it. She laid down again, curled into herself like a scared animal. The human sat near the door, holding a metal pipe like a weapon. Neither of them spoke. But the silence wasn't empty, it was heavy with questions. The fire grew smaller, and night took over outside. Strange growls echoed from deep in the woods, but the shelter stayed quiet. The girl didn't sleep that night, and neither did the man. They sat in the same room, two strangers from different worlds, but somehow, in that quiet place full of broken things, something new was starting. She glanced at him in the dark, watching how he stayed alert, never letting his guard down. He didn't know her name, and she didn't know his. But she knew one thing now: he had come when no one else did, and outside, watching through the trees, something else was waiting. It had seen the human carry her, and it had followed the scent of her blood. It made no sound as it moved, no light. As it passed through the shadows, it was not a beast, not fully, it was a hunter. And it did not forget when prey escaped its trap. The forest held its breath as dawn slowly approached. And inside the shelter, the girl finally closed her eyes. Not in peace, but in warning, because the man had saved her once. But danger was coming back, and next time, it would come for them both. The girl opened her eyes before the sun touched the trees. She didn't move, just stared at the cracked ceiling of the shelter. The smell of smoke and old wood was all around her. A low sound came from her throat, like a whimper she was too afraid to let out. She wasn't dreaming, and this wasn't her home, but she was alive. And that was rare these days. The human was already awake, sitting by the metal door with a tired face. He had watched the forest all night, listening to every sound. Now he turned and looked at her, his eyes calm but sharp. He nodded once, not saying a word. She sat up slowly, wrapping the blanket tighter around her small body. He pointed to a cup of water, then to her, and she understood. She took the cup, drank slowly, then placed it down without a sound. He looked at her, studying her face like a puzzle. He knew she was still scared, still unsure if he was a friend or just another kind enemy. He tried to speak again, pointing to himself, "Ryan," he said softly, tapping his chest. She stared at him, eyes narrowing, then looked away. He didn't push, just nodded again. Then he stood and stepped outside, slowly, checking the area. She waited inside, heart racing, wondering if he would come back. Minutes passed like hours. But then the door opened again. He returned, holding strange roots, berries, and a wrapped box from his bag. He dropped them on the table, made fire, and started to cook. The smell filled the room. Warm and earthy, her stomach growled, and she looked away, embarrassed. He didn't laugh, didn't mock, just handed her a bowl. She took it and ate quietly, every bite reminding her that this wasn't a dream, and slowly she began to study him too. He was strong, but something in his eyes said he had also lost things. She glanced around the shelter, seeing small signs of life, an old photo, a cracked helmet, wires hung with care. He wasn't just surviving, he was holding on to something. She wanted to ask where he came from, what he had seen, but her voice still wouldn't come. No matter how hard she tried, she touched her throat. Gently, as if testing it, he noticed, and his eyes softened. He stood again and walked to a drawer, pulling out an old data slate. He turned it on, showed her a screen with a keyboard, and offered it to her. She hesitated, then slowly typed a single word, Nova. He smiled, nodded, and tapped his chest again. "Ryan," he repeated, and this time she didn't look away. But the moment was broken by a sharp noise outside. Both of them turned fast, eyes wide. Ryan grabbed his metal pipe and moved to the door. Nova stood too, fear rising fast inside her chest. She knew that sound. It was a warning. A hunting drone had scanned their shelter from above. Ryan opened a panel in the wall, revealing a hidden scanner. He looked at it and cursed under his breath. Then he turned to her, serious now. "Someone's looking for you," he said, though she didn't understand. But she saw the way his face changed, how his hand stayed close to his knife. He wasn't calm anymore. He was ready for war. Nova typed again, fast, shaky letters. "They followed me?" Ryan nodded slowly, then turned off the slate and put it away. She stepped back, her breathing fast and uneven. She remembered the trap, the men in masks, the way they had laughed. She remembered being dragged, then breaking free, running through fire, and now they were close again. Ryan moved quickly, packing food, tools, a small weapon. He gave her a jacket, too big for her, but warm. She put it on, hands shaking. He opened the floor and revealed a hidden hatch leading underground. She looked at him in shock, but he nodded again. "We hide or we fight," his eyes said. Nova stepped down the hatch, heart pounding. Ryan followed, closing the hatch above them, sealing them in darkness. Only a small light glowed in the tunnel. As they walked deeper, she didn't know where it led, but she followed him without question. Because for the first time in her life, someone was choosing to protect her, not use her. And outside, above the shelter, Black Boots stepped into the dirt. A voice came through a mask, cold and sharp. "She's here," it said, as red lights scanned the ground. "Find the girl and kill the human." The forest was no longer silent, and the hunt had begun again. The underground tunnel smelled like dust and old metal. Nova walked behind Ryan, her bare feet touching the cold floor. The walls were rough, and the ceiling was low. It felt like a place forgotten by time, but not by him. His hand held a small light, the glow barely enough to see ahead. Still, he moved with confidence, like he had walked this path many times before. Nova stayed silent, but her mind raced. Her heart beat like a drum in her chest. She didn't want to go back to that cage, not ever again. Not to the collars, not to the chain gangs, not to the cruel laughter of men who saw her as less than alive. She had escaped once, and now she had someone who fought for her. But for how long could that last? They reached the end of the tunnel. A metal door covered in vines and dirt. Ryan brushed it off and opened it slowly. They stepped into another shelter, smaller, older, but dry and hidden beneath the trees. It had no power, no fire, Just tools and rations in dusty crates, he locked the door behind them, then sat down, rubbing his hands over his face. Nova watched him, wondering how many times he had done this before. She picked up the data slate again and typed, "How did you find me?" He read it and gave a small shrug, then pointed to his ear and made a screaming motion. She nodded slowly, then typed, "Why did you help?" This time, he didn't answer right away. He stared at her, then looked away. Maybe he didn't know the answer, or maybe it hurt to say it. He finally spoke, voice rough, "Because I heard you." Nova blinked, surprised by the softness in his tone. He didn't owe her anything, yet he had risked his life, and now they were hiding from something dangerous. She wanted to believe she could trust him, but trust was like glass, it only took one crack to break forever. A sharp clicking noise echoed outside the shelter. Ryan stood up fast, knife in hand. Nova froze, fear creeping up her spine like ice. She knew that sound. It was not an animal. It was the sound of boots moving, carefully, slowly, searching. The same sound that used to follow her in chains. Ryan looked through a hidden crack in the wall. He saw 3 figures moving between the trees. They wore dark armor and glowing visors, their weapons ready. He whispered, "They found this place too fast." Nova typed quickly, "They can track blood." He nodded, then handed her a small pistol. She stared at it, her hand shaking. "I don't kill," she typed, and his jaw tightened. "Then stay close to me," he said quietly. The door made a soft noise as Scan was running over the metal. Ryan motioned her to the back corner and crouched low beside her. His breathing slowed, trained like a soldier waiting for war. Then came a voice through the door, metallic and sharp. "We only want the girl. Hand her over and walk away." Ryan said nothing, his fingers gripping the knife tighter. "You have 10 seconds, the voice continued. Nova trembled, her back pressed to the wall, but something inside her refused to cry this time. The silence stretched, heavy and tense. Then Ryan moved, fast and fierce. He slammed a button hidden under a shelf, and the floor beneath them opened slightly. He pushed Nova through another narrow tunnel, then followed, behind them. The door exploded with fire and metal. The men stormed in, guns raised, but found no one. Nova and Ryan crawled deeper into the emergency tunnel. It was tighter, older, filled with dirt and roots, but it led away farther from the danger. As they moved, Nova felt her fear change into something else. Not just survival, but a burning fire in her chest. She didn't want to run forever. When they reached the exit, Ryan stopped. He looked at her with tired eyes. "They won't stop," he said. "They want you for something," Nova typed. "They call me Echo Child," he frowned, the words clearly unfamiliar. She typed again. "I can hear frequencies no one else can. Machines, thoughts, commands." Ryan stared at her, then slowly understood. That's why they hunted her, not for her body, but for her power. She was more than just an escaped prisoner. She was a key to something. He looked out over the new path ahead, the forest rising again around them. Nova stood beside him now, not as a victim, but as someone ready to stop running. Somewhere deep in the trees, another signal flashed. Another group received the coordinates. But this time, Nova and Ryan were not waiting to hide. They were going to make a stand. Rain started falling before the sky even turned gray. It came down sharp and cold, tapping the leaves, the ground. The rusted tools Ryan had left outside years ago. Nova stood under the trees, watching the droplets hit her hands for the first time. She didn't flinch at the sound of the wind. Her hair was wet, her face calm, but her eyes were burning. She had made her choice. No more running, no more hiding. Ryan placed the final charge under a fallen log, then covered it with leaves. He moved like someone who had done this many times before. Quick, focused, silent. He had turned the forest into a trap, but this time, it was for them, not her. Nova followed him, carrying a small bag of energy cells and sharp metal stakes. She was lighter on her feet now, stronger since the day he found her. He stopped near a wide tree and looked at her. "They'll come from the north," he said, pointing with his knife. They always come from higher ground, she nodded, then pointed to a small hill where she could see through the trees. It was the best place to warn him, to signal if they moved fast. He gave her a flare and said nothing more. The day passed. In silence, broken only by the sound of birds fleeing the trees. Then came the stillness, the kind that only happened before blood. Nova felt it in her bones, her skin, her teeth. She crouched behind a broken stump and waited, hands tight around. The flare. She thought about the time she had screamed and no one came. Now she held fire in her hands and someone was finally listening. Rian crouched behind a sharp bend in the trail. He had wired the area with sound mines and EMP darts, not enough to kill, but enough to slow, to confuse. He had been many things in his life, but the part he played best was the one with nothing left to lose. That was why he fought without hesitation. That was why Nova wasn't alone anymore. The first enemy came at dusk, stepping over wet roots with glowing boots, silent, masked, heavy. Armor over dark clothes. Behind him, 5 more followed. Spread like hunters in a pack, they moved in silence, weapons raised, eyes scanning everything. Nova pressed the flare tightly in her palm, her heart racing. Then she saw it, one of them. Turned toward the hill, scanning her direction. She didn't wait. Didn't freeze. She struck the flare against the rock. The red light shot into the air, burning like fire through the dark. The enemy looked up just in time to hear the mine snap. Then the blast threw dirt and leaves into the sky. Screams followed short. Cut off by shock and confusion, Ryan moved like lightning, dropping from a tree and slamming his fist into the nearest one. Nova didn't stay back this time. She slid down the hill, grabbed a fallen blaster, and fired at the legs of the second. Man, he dropped with a yell, his weapon falling into the mud. They were not ready for this, not ready for her. The hunters had become the hunted, and the trap they built for her had snapped on them instead. One enemy threw a stun grenade, and the light flashed through the trees. Nova closed her eyes just in time, but Rayan took a hit and stumbled. She screamed not in fear, but in rage, and the trees answered. Her voice hit the air in a strange, sharp wave. It wasn't just a sound, it was a signal. Every nearby device sparked, buzzed, and then died. The enemy's visors went black, their guns shut off, their comms went silent. They looked around, blind and afraid, and Ryan, still dazed, opened his eyes in shock. She had done that, Nova, the mute girl who never spoke. She had turned her scream into a weapon. The last 2 enemies tried to run, but Nova stepped in front of them, her hand glowing faintly now, the air humming around her like broken static. They dropped their weapons, backing away. She didn't shoot them, she didn't have to. They saw what she could do now, and they knew the price of hunting the wrong girl. Ryan stood beside her, breathing hard, his arm bleeding. "You okay?" he asked, voice rough. Nova looked at him, nodded slowly, then typed something on the data slate. "I'm done running," he gave a tired smile, wiping the blood from his face. "Good," he said, "because they'll be back. But now." They had a new plan. Nova wasn't just a target anymore. She was the storm that was coming, and Ryan would stand with her until the last man fell. Asterisk, the sky was no longer blue. It had turned a deep, strange red, as if warning the world something terrible was coming. Ryan stood at the edge of the cliff, looking down at the trees. They swayed in the wind, peaceful for now, but peace meant nothing. In this place, not when you knew war was walking toward you. Nova sat on a flat rock behind him, silent but not afraid. She was holding a tool he had given her, a piece of old tech from his soldier days. A voice breaker, he had called it. It was made to cancel enemy signals. But now it did something else. Nova had changed it, bent it, merged it with her own strange ability. And now it hummed in her hand like it was alive. Ryan turned and looked at her, his face hard but full of pride. "You've learned fast," he said. Nova looked at him and gave a small nod. She didn't smile. Not yet. This wasn't the time for smiling. She knew they would come soon, and this time, it wouldn't be 6 masked men with stun guns. This time, it would be the full unit, the hunters. From the deep zone, the ones with black ships and no faces. They were the ones who had captured her people. The ones who thought her kind were tools, not lives. And now they were coming to erase the only one who escaped. Nova, the last Echo child. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver tag. It was bent, scratched, and old, but it had the symbol of her family burned into it. She held it close for a moment, then placed it around her neck. She wasn't going to hide from what she was anymore. She was going to use it, even if it broke her. A low sound came from the clouds above like thunder, but mechanical. Ryan looked up sharply, eyes narrowing. "They're here," he whispered. A black ship broke through the sky like a blade through cloth. It didn't land, it hovered just above the trees. And from its sides, men dropped on long cables, armed and ready. Nova stood beside him now, calm like the eye of a storm. Ryan handed her a small remote, then took out his blaster. He checked the charge, gave her a nod, then stepped forward. The first wave landed and spread out, moving with machine-like precision. But this wasn't their ground. This was Nova's forest now. She closed her eyes, held the voice breaker tight, and let her mind reach out. The signals hit her ears like whispers. She heard their commands, their targets, their fear. They had no idea she could listen, and they were too late to stop her. With one sharp breath, she let out a sound, not a scream, not a word, but something. Deeper, it rippled through the trees, bounced off the rocks, and cut through every signal they had. Their visors went dark. Their weapons clicked empty. Their comms fell silent. They shouted to each other, confused, blind, and broken. Then came Ryan, fast and brutal. He moved like a shadow, striking and disappearing. Nova didn't stay back this time. She moved through the chaos, placing small pulse mines at their feet. The explosions were clean, non-lethal, but enough to send a message. She didn't want to kill them unless she had to. But if they came for her again, they wouldn't leave standing. A second group dropped from the ship, larger, meaner, with heavier armor. One of them shouted in a deep voice, "She's the last one, take her alive." Nova stopped, her eyes locking onto the speaker. He was the one who led the raid on her people. She remembered his voice even after all this time. She raised her hand, the voice breaker glowing white now. The energy burned through her skin, but she didn't stop. She let out another sound, sharper than the last. The soldier dropped his weapon, grabbing his head, screaming as the signal inside his helmet tore itself apart. He dropped to his knees, and Ryan tackled him with a roar. The fight was no longer just survival, it was justice. The rest of the soldiers began to retreat, dragging their wounded. The ship lifted higher, scared for the first time. Nova stood tall in the middle of the burning grass, her breath shaking. Ryan walked to her, blood on his hands but victory in his eyes. He looked at the sky and shouted, "You picked the wrong planet." Then he laughed because they were finally running. Nova fell to her knees, tired but alive. She looked at Ryan and smiled for the first time. He sat beside her, pulling off his jacket and wrapping it around her. "You did it," he said. She typed on the data slate, "We did." And behind them, the forest stood in silence. No more screams, no more chains, only breath and fire and freedom. Smoke drifted through the trees like ghosts with no home. The battle was over. But the forest didn't feel peaceful yet. The air still held the weight of shouting, gunfire, and that strange pulse of Nova's scream. She sat on the ground, arms resting on her knees, breathing in short, tired gasps. Her skin was marked with tiny burns, glowing lines where the energy had flowed through her. But she was still here, and more alive than she had ever felt. Ryan crouched beside her, face bloody, arm bandaged, and eyes never still. He checked the tree line again, making sure no one was coming. Only wind moved now, blowing leaves over the bodies of broken machines and dropped weapons. The enemy had retreated, but they hadn't surrendered. That black ship had vanished into the sky, but not without warning. They would return. And next time, they'd come prepared. Nova looked at the voice breaker in her hands. Now cracked and dim, she had used it past its limit, burned it nearly to the core, and yet, part of her still felt the signal inside her chest. It was faint, quiet, but still there like a whisper behind her heartbeat. She had changed, not just her body but something deeper. She wasn't just an echo child anymore, she was becoming something new. Ryan touched her shoulder gently and pointed back toward the hill. They needed to move, find a new place before the next wave came. But Nova didn't stand. She shook her head and tapped her fingers on the dirt. She wanted to stay, to finish it, to end the chase forever. Ryan watched her carefully, then gave a slow nod together. They walked to the edge of the cliff. Below them, the forest stretched wide and endless, but far in the distance, just above the horizon, a shimmer of metal moved across the clouds, a fleet, silent and hungry, scanning the world from above. Nova narrowed her eyes, her mind reaching outward again, and this time, something reached back. It wasn't enemy tech, it was old, deep, and waiting, hidden under the earth. Long before even the soldiers came, she could hear it like an echo in a tunnel, a message left behind for someone who could listen. She looked at Ryan and pointed downward. Beneath the forest, something was calling her. They followed her instincts, passing through fallen trees and shattered devices, past rivers, sharp rocks, and quiet graves of metal, until they reached an opening in the ground, covered by thick vines. Nova stepped forward and placed her hand on the stone. It pulsed faintly, and the vines pulled back, revealing a staircase lit by blue light, humming like music. They went down. Slowly, carefully, as the walls began to glow, symbols danced across them. Some familiar, some strange. Ryan touched one, and a voice whispered through the room, not in words, but in meaning. This was an ancient vault, built by her kind long ago, a place of memory, of warning, of power, and inside it, Nova would find the rest of what she was. At the center, a pillar rose, glowing with soft light. She stepped toward it, and the room responded. Screens lit up. Energy moved, and sounds filled the air. She didn't need a translator this time, she understood. They had left this for her, or someone like her, a chance to choose, to either vanish or rise. Ryan stood back, watching as Nova placed both hands on the pillar. Her body lifted slightly, her hair flowing upward as energy surrounded her. The vault accepted her, and in return, gave her its knowledge. Visions passed through her mind, her people in chains, in hiding, in pain, but also stories of resistance, of escape, of voices turned into weapons. She saw herself in the future, not running, but leading, when her feet touched the ground again. She turned to Ryan. Her eyes glowed softly, but her face was calm. She walked over, picked up the data slate, and typed, "We don't run anymore." He smiled, proud and ready. "Then we fight smart," he said. "And we don't fight alone." Outside, the fleet above the forest shifted. Confused by the signal rising from the vault, Nova stepped out into the sun with Ryan beside her. She raised her hand to the sky, and for the first time, the forest itself seemed to answer. Machines hidden for ages powered on deep underground. Her voice, once broken, now called not for help but for unity. For those still hiding to rise, and far away, others like her heard the signal, one by one. They opened their eyes. The girl once caught in a wild trap had become the voice of a new storm, and the man who had heard her scream was now the one she stood beside. Not as prey, not as a victim, but as a warrior. Together, they would no longer whisper in fear. They would speak, and the stars would listen.